Over the years, as the Sadler family, we had a number of pets when we were all one household. And among them were certain rodents. So, there was a brief flirtation at one point with getting bunnies. I was in 4-H. That never actually panned out. We had guinea pigs for a while, which maybe I'll talk about in some other story. And then when we moved to Waukesha, I remember that when I was in high school, my sister had gerbils. Those didn't work out. As a matter of fact, the mother gerbil gave birth and then ate her young, and that really grossed Laura, my sister, out, and also my mom, and that was the end of that, basically. I don't remember what became of them. I think they were given away to somebody. But then, I think this is when I was out of the Army, and up until the time when I was in college, when I was still sometimes like staying at home, my sister Laura, who was about 3 years behind me in school and 2.5 years younger than me, she ended up getting a hamster, and she named him Daryl. And very quickly, we ended up giving him a nickname, which she didn't like. She named him Daryl, I think, after one of the characters in S.E. Hinton's book, The Outsiders. And we started calling him Deke, sort of a hillbilly name. And she didn't like that, but it kind of stuck. And he was a really interesting hamster. Hamsters are quite intelligent, at least certain of them. And he was one of those guys. And so, she would take him out and he would do his hamsterish things, sniff around us, and he would hang out with us. And we would do things like he would get up on the table and we would feed him shelled peanuts because we always had peanuts around for some reason. He'd stick them in his little cheek pouches until they got really, really big. And I'll tell you more about that in just a bit. But first I want to tell you about some sleeping arrangements. And I don't know exactly why he made the transition from being in Laura's room to my room. Maybe he was making too much noise at night and keeping her awake or something like that. I mean, this is many decades ago. But I at that time, I was living in a kind of, bohemian way. I had a mattress on the floor with a sheet on it and, blankets and stuff like that. And then I had his cage on the floor as well. And at first, what I would do is I left the top off his cage. And I know he liked to cuddle with me. As a matter of fact, sometimes we'd lay on the couch and watch TV together. And he'd cuddle up with me and make little hamsters chirping noises and tuck in and all that sort of stuff. And so anyway, at nighttime, he liked to get under the blanket and cuddle up with me. So at first I made a ramp. Right? So he could actually climb out of his cage, which was essentially a big aquarium that had wood chips in the bottom and a little house he could hide in, and of course a wheel and a water bottle and thing for food and all of that. So he would climb out at night and then he would cuddle up with me. But the trouble is that he wouldn't stay still for all that long. And so eventually I took the ramp out. And this shows you how smart the little guy was. So he started exercising, and he would actually pull himself up his water bottle. And I'd hear that at night, and I'd shine a flashlight over, and there he was trying to climb up it. And at first he couldn't. He was a little bit too fat. And then he got in a good enough shape where he would actually climb up the water bottle and use that as sort of an impromptu ladder to jump out of the cage and come hang out with me. So, then I was okay, we got to put the lid onto his cage. And I did that, but I didn't put the very top part of the lid. It was in two pieces. So there was a little, square hole that you could open up and reach into it with. So eventually, That stopped him for a couple days, and then he would get up on top of his water bottle, and he would jump out of the cage. Of course, he couldn't get back in again, and then he would come over by me. So finally, I started putting the top part on, but I didn't put it all that tightly. And then he would get on the water bottle and hit it with his paw until it would open. And so eventually, I just sort of it was like, well, clearly this guy wants to hang out with me at night, and I'll just get used to it. And I did. And we started letting him just kind of have run of the house. And he would wander around. And anyway, he would pop out. He was very friendly. He really enjoyed hanging out with people. Sometimes I would be like on the couch, or I'd be stretching on the floor, and he'd come out and he'd have his little eyes beady and bulging and come up to me and sniff. And I'd say, "Hey, Deke, how you doing?" And he'd kind of look at me, and then sometimes he'd go off and do something. And, my mom was not happy with this, because she had a, view that like animals, particularly animals that look like rats, as rodents tend to do, they need to be in their proper place. But we were like, why shouldn't the poor guy have some freedom to explore and enjoy? I mean, maybe he's pooping in different places that we don't know about, but, we vacuum the floor, and if we ever find some spot, it's not that big of a deal. And he would sometimes actually show up back in his cage, getting some water out of the water bottle and eating and stuff like that. Presumably he was pooping in his cage as well. So anyway, we just started letting him kind of wander around the house. And the house had a single story. It's what you call a ranch home. And it wasn't that big. There was a living room, a family room, a kitchen that was attached, and then the 3 bedrooms, my mom's, my sister's, and mine. And then there was a basement. And interestingly, he figured out how to get into the basement. Now, the basement was as big as the rest of the house, right? Because that's the way things are here in the Midwest. And it was a finished basement. And so there was like a big area that we would go in that was tiled. And we had couches and chairs and record player down there. That's where I used to play my bass guitar. Then there was like a den area, and then like a laundry/workbench area. And I spent a lot of time down there. And it was interesting because after a while, Deke would come and visit me down there. I'd be like, on the workbench painting miniature figurines, because I used to do this wargaming stuff with a friend of mine. Or I'd be working on other things, some metal or woodwork, and listening to my music. And every once in a while I'd look over and there would be Deke just kind of sitting up watching me, and I'd go over and pet him a bit, and then he'd scurry off and do his thing. And so anyway, he became kind of an interesting little fixture. And this went on for quite a long time, at least a year, probably a year and a half of him wandering around the house, doing what he wanted to. And so coming back to like the peanut thing, we had these peanuts in the shells. And so my mom would buy them like by the bag, and then we'd eat them. And so anyway, one day he's up on the kitchen table, and we're like, I wonder how many peanuts this guy would take. And so we shell them, and we take a single peanut and we give it to him, and he grabs it with like both of his little paws, and he pops it into his mouth. And so hamsters have these gigantic sacs that they use. They're like their cheeks, and they store seeds and other kinds of food in there. And then they go and put them wherever it is that they're hiding their food, right? So that's what Deke would do. And we just kept giving him peanuts over and over again. And we're like, how many can this guy possibly take? And his cheeks are getting bigger and bigger. And we didn't really know that the cheeks extend basically down their torso. And he's getting fatter and fatter. And he's just, we're like, okay, here's 10, here's 20, here's 30. we ended up giving him more than 50 peanuts, which he stuffed into his cheeks. And I mean, he could hardly waddle around, but he was making a good effort. And then, clearly he wanted to be put down. So, I took him kind of gingerly and put him on the ground. And he, kind of wobbly, wandered off, and wherever he hid that hoard of peanuts, he must have thought it was like Hamster Christmas or something, wherever he hid that hoard, he probably lived on that for weeks on end. And he was a cute little guy, everybody in the family and all my friends, our house was like the hangout house where all of my burnout criminal friends would hang out, and my mom was cool with that. As a matter of fact, once I turned 21, she was like, "You can drink whatever you want in the house, so long as you stay in the house. Of course, don't go driving or anything like that." So we would play like Axis and Allies, board game, or we would play on computer games. I forget exactly. I think my friend Marshall would often come over, and he would like bring his computer place. It wasn't a PlayStation, but it was something like that, and we would play games. And everybody was friends with my sister as well. And then there was this little hamster he was almost like a little mascot or something. And as time went on, I think sightings, let's call them, of Deke became less and less frequent. And more often, I would see him downstairs. So I think that he made himself like a little nest or something somewhere in the basement that, was tucked away behind stuff. And that's where he probably hid his food and, all of that sort of stuff. I'm not sure where. I mean, we had the cage, and he would sometimes go in there and drink water. He must have gotten water from somewhere else as well. I'm not sure how exactly it worked. We weren't really thinking much at that time. And, over time, the sightings got less and less frequent. And then, there wasn't any one day. It was just like, I haven't seen Deke for a while. I wonder what's going on with him. And we just never saw him again. So I don't know if he died somewhere in the basement and we just never found out, or if he found a way to get out of the house. Not a surprise. I mean, houses were not that well sealed at the time, and just, got outside and had his freedom that way. Or, what happened to the little guy. But it was quite an interesting period. And he could be quite affectionate. I really liked him. I didn't have any pets of my own at the time. But he kind of became more my hamster than Laura's hamster. But he was friendly with everybody. And everybody liked him and would watch out for him. If you knew that he was scurrying around on the floor, you'd watch where you stepped and all of that, so you couldn't possibly hurt him or crush him or anything like that. And I don't know exactly why I was thinking about him the other day, but I thought it's been a long time, and I thought, yeah, that might be a cool story to tell. The rest of the pets, that was the only hamster we ever had. We had guinea pigs, we had dogs, cats at different times, but we never had this little hamster, except for that one time. And he turned out to be quite a cool little guy, living his great free hamster life in our house in Waukesha.